Hello everyone and welcome to another most exciting game from the 2019 FIDE World Cup. It's Maxime Vachier Lagrave versus Peter Svidler. Maxime eliminated in the previous round Dmitry Yakovenko, a very strong grandmaster. They went into tie breaks, and Peter Svidler eliminated Liviu Nisipeanu, who of course eliminated Hikaru Nakamura from the competition. So as closer as you get to the finals, it's of course more intense. So without further ado, let's check it out. It's a very long theoretical struggle, so we're not going to dwell too long on the opening. But Maxime opens with e4. Sorry about that. We have e5 by Svidler, knight to f3, knight to c6, and now bishop to b5. So the Ruy Lopez is on the board. We have a6, Morphy's defense, bishop to a4, and knight to f6. We have castles. And bishop to e7, rook to e1, and now b5, pushing the bishop back, bishop to b3, and here Svidler castles. And we have c3. Maxime is inviting Svidler to go for d5, the martial attack, but Svidler perhaps didn't check it for quite a while, so he decides not to go for it, which is a shame as it's such a, interesting opening. He goes d6, so we remain in the closed Ruy Lopez. h3 by white, and now knight to a5, pushing the bishop back, making room for c5, with bishop to c2, and now c5, with d4 by white, and queen to c7. Just to give you an example, this opening is played so much that there are over almost 6,000 games in the database with this exact same position. Knight b to d2, with c captures on d4, c captures, and now knight back to c6, pressuring the d4 pawn. So Maxime defends it with knight to b3 and now a5, preparing a4 to dislodge, the knight and capture on e4. With bishop to e3, Maxime introduces another defender to the pawn here, also nicely develops the bishop, makes room for the rook to come into the game. And a4 by Svidler. We have knight b to d2 and now bishop to d7, connecting rooks, developing the bishop. We have rook to c1 and now rook a to c8. With bishop back to d3, now the rook is nicely on this open c file. And now there are some 14 games in the database where queen to b8 was played, and it is considered the strongest move recommended by the engine, but Svidler goes queen to b7, which is a new move, and it is as of move 18 that we have a completely new game. So let's see what happens. We have queen to e2, developing the queen. The rooks are now nicely connected. Also, there is pressure on the b5 pawn, although there is no immediate danger of capturing it, as Svidler just goes h6, takes away the g5 square from white's pieces. And here, you would actually be worse if you captured on b5, because bishop captures runs into knight captures on d4, because this comes with an attack on the queen, and also there's now a double attack on the bishop here on b5. Sorry about that. So here you would just have knight captures on d4, knight captures on d4, you would play rook captures on c1, rook captures on c1, and now e captures on d4. And now first, as you don't want to lose too much material, first bishop to a6, attack the queen, and after the queen moves, now you move your bishop, and after black captures this pawn, black is up a pawn, but also in a better position. So this is one pawn that is not free for grabs, with a3 by MVL, and now e captures on d4. So we're going to see a lot of trades here, which of course Svidler doesn't mind. He has the black pieces. He wants to trade down, have a solid position, and if an opportunity arises, take it. If not, take his chance with the white pieces. We have knight captures, bishop captures, rook captures on c1, we have captures on c1, and now as your b5 pawn is still hanging, you don't have time to get your rook into the game. First b4 by Svidler. And okay, knight to c4, that the c4 square has been vacated for the knight now, and now b captures on a3. We have b captures on a3 and bishop to b5 now. Here, Svidler allows Maxime a nice tactic. Maxime plays a knight captures on d6. It's a sort of a temporary pawn sacrifice, but he will win his piece back with bishop captures on d3, queen captures, and bishop captures on d6. So for the moment, Svidler is up a piece, but not for long. You cannot play e5. e5 just runs into bishop captures on a3, and you lose the rook on c1. But what you can do is just bishop captures on f6. And now, of course, if black captures, you just recapture on d6, and there's your piece back. So we have bishop to f4, Svidler again goes for the rook on c1, and now rook to b1, first with an attack on the queen. queen to c7, and now the bishop just retreats. We have bishop back to c3. And now Svidler is finally free to bring the rook into the game. We have rook to d8 with an attack on the queen, queen to f3, and now rook to c8, putting pressure on the bishop here. And the bishop to b4. The bishop is nicely on a nice diagonal here, guarding the a3 pawn, and at some point, if black allows it, maybe go queen d1, grab that pawn, and maybe start pushing your past a pawn, if possible. And here, bishop to c1. It's a very nice move, as it completely blocks the white rook from entering the game. Also, next you're going to go queen to c2, and the black is going to have, well, a very nice position. But here, Svidler played queen to c1 check. And it's, of course, a very nice idea if the queen is captured. If the queen is captured, you get check, you have to give up some material, and it's checkmate as the h2 square is covered by the bishop. But Maxime brought his queen back. We have queen to d1, and now Svidler, not interested in trading queens, he goes back. Queen to c4. So what do you play here? Well, you could grab the a4 pawn, but then you lose the e4 pawn. So here Maxime played g3 first. He doesn't want this bishop constantly covering the h2 square, so he doesn't have any more back rank issues. He can move the queen and the rook from the back rank. You can always go king to h2. And here the problem is Svidler probably thought that after bishop to e5 that well, queen captures on a4 is coming. But the problem is if you play queen captures on a4, now it seems like white is up 2 pawns completely winning, but black has bishop captures on g3 now, and there's it's a pretty equal position now, because if you capture the bishop, then you get queen d4 check, king has to move, and now queen to f2 check. So now after the king moves, you're gonna bring the rook back, rook here, threatening checkmate, and here white has to give up the queen, and black, of course, will be winning here. But Svidler most likely either thought that this doesn't work, or he found a different line, but there is a move very interesting that he might have missed. Svidler here played queen captures on e4, so he sacrificed his bishop for this very nice attack. Maxime played g captures on f4, and now Svidler played rook to c6, preparing rook to g6 check. And now, to give you an idea, for example, if white plays something like rook to c1, then okay, you get rook to g6 check, king moves, you get queen g2 check, king moves, you can go queen to e or king to e1. Now you can go rook back to e6 check, or if you don't go here, if you go up the board, for example, king to e2, you can even go queen e4 check. And now if you return, it's well, draw by perpetual, or if you go well, further down the board, then queen captures on f4 and so on. And white is still up a piece, but his king is well, running loose on an open board. It's hard to say. Engine will defend it, but it's hard to say if a human will be comfortable defending this. But there is one much better move that most likely came as a surprise to Svidler, but it's hard to say. So feel free to pause the video and try to find this idea that was missed by black. While I give you a couple of seconds. For those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, you are an excellent room maker for your bishop. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, the move is f5. This is very strong. The problem is, if you try bishop to d6 here, yes, it blocks rook to g6, but then just queen g6 check, and after king moves, now you capture the bishop, rook captures, and white is no longer up a piece. The problem is, after this f5 move, it no longer works, because now, well, rook to g6 is prevented with the f5 pawn, so really very nice if you found it. And also what it does, it removes the pawn from f4, so now you can actually play bishop to d6, and after the rook to g6 check is made, retreat with bishop to g3. This is well, the only defensive resource that was good for white here. Maxime, of course, found it. Svidler captured on f5, and now bishop to d6. And now queen g6 check is nothing, because you simply retreat with bishop to g3. There is no pawn on f4. It's just a beautiful defensive idea. Also, if you're thinking about rook captures here, with the idea that if queen captures, you capture the rook on b1, it doesn't work because of the simple check. Rook checks, and then you pick up the rook, you're simply up a whole rook. So after bishop to d6, we have queen captures on h3 by Svidler, but now rook to b4. Grabbing the b4 square with the rook, now the queen can move as black can deliver no more checks. We have rook to, not there, sorry, rook to c3 by Svidler, and now comes rook to d4, just consolidating with king to h7, putting a king to a safer square, and now queen captures on a4. Just grabbing that pawn. Now Maxime created a passed a pawn with queen to f3, hoping to get rook to c1 check-in, but Maxime just retreats. Queen to d1, and now queen to c6, hoping to get rook to c1 in to win the queen, but queen to f1, making room for the rook on d1, and here it was in this position on move 42 that Peter Svidler resigned the game, and a wonderful victory for Maxime Vachier Lagrave, who tomorrow, today basically as I'm making the video today, has the black pieces against Svidler, and if he can hold the draw, it will be... he advances in the World Cup, and Svidler is out. So he resigned as there is nothing more to do here. MVL is up a full bishop, and you will just, further consolidate, maybe move the bishop here, put the rook behind the passed pawn, start pushing it, and that's just it. You don't really even have to struggle to win this. Svidler, of course, knows this. He could pose problems for Maxime, start pushing on the king side, really try to complicate the position as much as possible, but he knows that Maxime would really have to play the worst game ever for him not to be able to win this. But yeah, and a little spoiler alert for those of you who are maybe interested. I've actually seen the results of game 2 before making this video, so I will mention them now. If you don't want to hear it, just skip. But Svidler and Maxime drew game 2 of their FIDE 2019 World Cup, and that means Maxime advances further into round 5, and Peter Svidler is out of the FIDE World Cup. So that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Peter Knurich, Ravindra Joglakar, Kamal Zabkovsky, Matthias Kraft, and Ferdinand Sutter for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check all my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the FIDE World Cup, checking up on your suggestions, and so on. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.